Teaching with the Smithsonian. Montgomery College videos are a collection of interviews with Montgomery College Smithsonian faculty fellows, sharing how they engage and empower students while exploring the complex challenges of the 21st century, such as climate change, social justice, and pandemics. Fellows offer concrete examples of how to work remotely with the Smithsonian, artifacts, and resources. Their work is adaptable for high school and college audiences. Be sure to visit their linked resources.
My name is Stephanie Landon. I teach English as a second language in Montgomery College's English Language for Academic Purposes program. In our English Language for Academic Purposes program, we have 3 levels. The first 2 levels include individualized courses for skills, for example, grammar and writing, reading, and oral communication skills. Our 3rd level is a capstone level, which is an integrated skills course. Students are working on developing their academic English proficiency in all of the skills groups. And it's really meant to be preparatory for English 101. I've taught in all of the courses and all levels in our program, and I really had to think about which course would be the best opportunity for utilizing the Smithsonian. I actually utilized aspects of the museum websites in 2 of my courses in the lowest level grammar and writing course for one descriptive writing project. And then I developed a really full module for our capstone course. And the capstone course is what I'll focus on with my description today. In our capstone course, students are working on writing academic compositions, public speaking, delivering academic presentations, and they're really working on developing some technical skills for reading, writing, speaking, and listening. As I considered how to utilize the Smithsonian in this course, it became clear that we could use an entire module of scaffolded steps for students to develop these academic skills while using resources from the Smithsonian. For my module, I asked students a really big question. How in history can we identify times of struggle within communities and community coming together to solve these challenges? And how can we find artifacts in a museum that represent these historical experiences with communities? And ultimately, students were going to be analyzing how we can learn from an artifact about history and apply those lessons to challenges communities are facing today. So with the project, students were taken through a module that lasted 4 weeks and began with a lot of scaffolding, first of researching and looking at a variety of Smithsonian Museum websites, identifying different artifacts and how they could respond to the prompt and the theme that we were discussing, and then to take what they were analyzing and considering, and then apply it in a presentation and an essay. I devised a site or a page in my Blackboard course that included links to a variety of Smithsonian museums. And in addition to the main museum link, I also provided more targeted links to pages that might make it easier for them to find items of evidence and artifacts for their project. Students were encouraged to look at a variety of websites. We did kind of scavenger hunt activities in the first week of the module where students looked at different museum websites in the Smithsonian Institution and looked for artifacts that represented some kind of historical struggle and discussed with their classmates. Ultimately, for the end projects, students were invited to either take a virtual museum tour on one of the museum websites of their choice, or to go physically into a museum, as the Smithsonians are quite close to Montgomery College's campuses. Students were able to create a video based on their visit where they presented some of the meaningful experiences that they had in their virtual or in their in-person visit. For their final project, again, students could have chosen an item from their in-person visit or an item from their virtual visit. The majority of students did go to the museum website ultimately to capture an image from their museum visit or their virtual visit for their project. Students weren't required to look at one museum website or one artifact. They were invited to look at a variety of Smithsonian Museum's websites. Students were provided with a list of links to all of the museums on my Blackboard course, and I was also able to provide links to targeted sites within the main museum site that might get them to items of evidence that were relevant for the project a little bit faster. Students ultimately chose most often the National Museum of American History, the National Portrait Gallery, and the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Although other students did choose some of the other museums, those three were the most common in the semesters that I've taught the course. In terms of providing artifacts for students, in my learning lab, I did provide some examples of items of evidence that would be relevant for this project. And so in that regard, I provided students with specific artifacts that could be examples of answering that question or prompt for their project. For the project, I created my own extensive learning lab for students to kind of look through and start to see some possible examples for items of evidence for their project. So within the learning lab, I had a very big collection of images of different types of art. It could have been a poster that was in a poster gallery in the National Portrait Gallery, a sculpture from the Natural History Museum, or a painting that was hung in our National Museum of African American History and Culture. I tried to have a collection that was very diverse, both in the objects presented, but also in the type of art or the medium that the artifact is presented in. I wanted to show students, that the item of evidence didn't need to be a painting necessarily, just because we're looking at a museum. It could be an entire exhibit, depending on what historical challenge they're interested in presenting on. So the students had a collection to scaffold and guide them in how to complete the project. One of the ways that I used the Learning Lab to scaffold students is early in the project, as we're still building our understanding of how to answer this very abstract and challenging prompt, was to show students an example of different members of the community and how they contributed to solving a problem. In the Cooper Hewitt Museum website, there's a really interesting video that's available about how researchers and developers at the beginning of the pandemic worked together to address the shortage of masks in hospitals. They came together from different institutions and developed code in order to create 3D printable masks, and they sent that code around the nation to hospitals that didn't have enough PPE for their staff. So that's one way that a museum was able to show us a challenge and how research and developers were able to meet the needs and solve the challenge or solve the problem. After looking at that example, we then looked at an example that was in an article in the Folklife magazine, which is also published by the Smithsonian. And in the Folklife magazine, they did a piece on a woman in the Midwest who, during the beginning of the pandemic, was also working to solve the problem of a mask shortage. She owned a small shop, and she was a clothing designer. So using extra fabric that she had, she started making masks and giving them out to the community. In addition to making masks from the fabric that she had left over from projects, she started integrating ribbons into the design. And these ribbons had a really special symbolic representation for her Native American culture. She was able to use her masks to represent her culture and also to meet the needs of the community during the mask shortage. A third example that I provided to show another level or layer of community involvement are the many articles that we could find in the beginning of the pandemic about people in their home garages making masks to meet the public need for the mask during the masking shortage. And so we were able to look at, in our learning lab, 3 different groups of community members. So the everyday people sewing masks in their garages, business members and messengers creating masks and providing them to the community, and then researchers and developers developing masks to meet the needs of staff in hospitals around the country. To me, every time I've done this project, the most exciting part is when students produce and present their gallery walk project. So the gallery walk is meant to be much more focused on student experience with the museum than answering the prompt that we're looking at for the semester and for the project. The gallery walk allows students and asks students to share a memorable or meaningful experience that they have in the museum, either in a virtual visit or in an in-person visit. One example that was just really wonderful to view was a student who was an art teacher in her country of origin. She came to the United States later in life and is working on improving her English language skills because she's interested in pursuing an associate's degree in the US. But she came to this project really skeptical about using a website to really be able to analyze art. And her museum gallery walk video starts off with her explaining about that skepticism. And then she goes through a few of pieces that she found through her virtual visit and how impressed she was that she could really look at that art on her computer screen and connect and engage with it. And ultimately, at the end of her video, she commented on how she now really sees through this one aspect of the project that you can use virtual museum websites to look at art, to appreciate art, and to analyze art. And that really impressed me. So I think that whenever instructors introduce something novel, something different than what is typically done, students benefit from it. The class benefits from it, and the instructor benefits from it. So through this Smithsonian project, the students are really able to investigate their learning in a way that they haven't done before. And they're given a space and an opportunity to look at something that they might not have considered otherwise. So rather than simply teaching, writing, and presenting, students are asked to really engage with something new, something different in a meaningful way, and then apply those writing skills that we're learning and those public speaking skills that we're learning. And so whenever you do something new and creative that allows for flexibility and creativity on the part of the student, and choice, the opportunity to choose an artifact to write about, you really start to see students grow and their engagement grow, which is what is so special about this Smithsonian project. In addition to the technical writing and presenting skills that were really the course objectives that were integrated into this project, what students gain from a Smithsonian project really is this idea that beyond the classroom, beyond the textbook, there is learning. There are opportunities for critical thinking. There are opportunities for considering more beyond your degree or beyond your field of study. And when we start to see beyond the textbook, beyond the degree, then we start thinking more critically, and students will grow in terms of how they think about other new pieces of information that they gain. They might find new ways to engage themselves in their degree, in their field of study. So I believe that my students have been enriched by their involvement with museum learning, probably in more ways than I can even state here. The first semester that I used this project was in the spring of 2021, and so there were still a lot of restrictions on where people could go. In that semester, the Smithsonian museums did eventually open by the time we were working on this capstone project. And even though we had an opportunity or the option to either do our projects virtually or in person, a great deal of my students chose to meet in person because they were really missing that human connection, and they were looking forward to actually being in the same space with one another. It was really amazing to arrive at the museum and see that many of them had already arranged to arrive early so that they could introduce themselves in person. And so for them, this museum experience not only helped improve their skills academically, their critical thinking, but it also allowed us to build a sense of community that we might not have been able to do if it weren't for this museum visit. In students who chose to stay virtual, they commented that they felt that this project gave them an opportunity to think differently about their own learning, to think differently about their roles in community, and to think differently about how impactful we as individuals can be when solving problems. They really commented on how the lessons from the past definitely apply to the challenges that we face today. I think overall this project really helped students to consider their roles as community members and also to identify how historically community has been the solution in every challenge that we have faced, whether it's in our local communities, our national communities, or our global community. And so through this project and through looking at art as items of evidence of overcoming struggle in the past, students were able to really identify and connect to challenges that we are facing today and to articulate what it means about the role that we as individuals can play in the solution. And so beyond the lesson, beyond the writing, beyond the grammar, we're really asking our students in these projects to be global citizens and to view themselves as valuable, as worthy, and also as integral in making sure our communities thrive and succeed. For me, I don't know why this happens every time, but I continue to be surprised and inspired by my students and how they connect to these museum projects. So it's always my hope and my goal that doing something like this does increase student engagement and involvement, but it's always so amazing to see when it really, really does happen for students. I had one student in particular who found a piece of art in the National Portrait Gallery that was a painting about just a painting of wheat. And the title was Wheat. And when she read what the painting was actually symbolic of, it was the Holodomor massacre in the Ukraine in the past. And she's from Eastern Europe, and for her, this really brought up some emotions. And rather than avoiding it, she really dove into analyzing how this piece of art represents the lives lost of people. And so again, when we offer these opportunities for students to look at a variety of pieces of art, there's going to be something that really connects with them. And that's the opportunity for them to really dive deep into their own investigation and their own connection and their own experience, and represent that in an academic way. If I were to give any advice to other faculty and instructors who are looking to do this remotely, the first thing that I would like to say is don't be afraid. Be creative and be okay with not everything working. In my experience, things that worked really great for one group maybe didn't work so well for another group. But as long as you have that desire for success for your students and that engagement with your virtual students, it's really, really possible for students and you to move through a project successfully and to have positive experiences. I would say be flexible, offer choices to your students because the museums offer so much. Find parameters that you can provide to students to help control kind of the boundaries of the search because it can be very overwhelming, but give them some choice so that they can actually discover what engages them and what connects them. And again, like my student commented, who was an art teacher, that she was very surprised to learn that she could enjoy a virtual museum visit, and she was looking forward to going on more virtual museum visits until she felt comfortable going back out into the world. I think that my teaching improves and evolves and develops every time I endeavor upon trying something different and something new. So just as students grow from novel experiences, so do I as an instructor. And everything that I try to do to engage my students should also be engaging to me. So I often will start with something that's interesting for me and then develop it into something that will also be interesting and engaging for my students. So each time that I have used the Smithsonian in my course, either for one assignment or for a capstone module, I find that I learn more about how to refine my course design, how to refine my instruction, and how to get students to the engaging bit more efficiently. And through this project, I really have been able to discover that students connect to something that they have a choice about, and they connect to something that's different than what they're doing in their everyday classes. And I feel that the Smithsonian will continue to provide me opportunities to think about how to improve my course design and improve my delivery and instruction and getting students to meet those objectives. So during my fellowship, I'm sure every fellow says this, but I absolutely was in the best cohort that ever existed. I had an amazing cohort of very talented faculty that I could learn from, and I was so interested in what they were doing in their disciplines and in their courses. We had a very diverse group in terms of discipline, and so this made it so interesting to really learn what each faculty member, each fellow was developing for their course. And so what I did for this project was something I don't think anyone had done before. I put my project kind of prompt to my cohort, and I invited my fellows to create a video that showed an item of evidence from their discipline that they would choose from a Smithsonian museum and talk about how it represents a community's challenge and overcoming that challenge. And I was so blown away by the number of videos my fellows provided for me. But we now have documented 6 or 7 fellows, talking about how they would use an item of evidence from one of the Smithsonian museums in their discipline to discuss and represent challenge. So This cohort really helped me learn how others were doing meeting the project guidelines in their disciplines, and it really inspired my own project development as well. And of course, it's just inspiring in general to work in a room full of others who are equally passionate about meeting the needs of students and student engagement. I think if James Smithson were to see the delivered project items from my students, their gallery walk, their discussions, and their final essay project, I think he would say that's exactly what he was hoping his museums would be used for. Students to look at different artifacts developed by people from this country and abroad, and to think about how it represented community and the importance of community engagement, and to analyze that and connect it to challenges we're facing today. I would hope that he would be impressed by my students and their ability to answer such a big prompt. I would like anyone who's considering using a museum, virtual or in person, in instruction, to move past the consideration stage and start really thinking about how you could do this and just give it a try. Like I said, I've done this for a very low-level writing course where it's just a learning lab collection of paintings that students choose from and then use descriptive writing techniques to describe the painting and then write their reaction to the painting. And again, this is something novel, something new, something that they may have not been asked to do before. And anytime you try something new, students will be engaged and you'll be engaged. So I just encourage you to take the next step and give it a try.
This video was produced by Montgomery College Television on behalf of MC's Paul Peck Humanities Institute and Smithsonian's Office of Educational Technology. It is a companion to the Smithsonian's X course, Teaching with the Smithsonian, addressing 21st century challenges in the community college classroom. Learn more about this course at edx.org. Faculty interviewed for these videos teach at Montgomery College, a community college in suburban Maryland, just a subway ride from the Smithsonian Museums on the National Mall. Our MC Smithsonian Faculty Fellowship has spurred more than 25,000 visits by students and their families since 1998. Find our other faculty video interviews at youtube.com/Montgomery College.